The dust hadn't even settled. A thin red haze still hung in the air as the first boots hit the ground. Human boots. Heavy, worn from years in deep space. The ground cracked under their weight, not just from the pressure of metal soles but from something deeper. Older. Like the planet itself groaned as if it knew what had come. No one spoke at first. There were too many unspoken things between them. Tired eyes scanned the horizon, blinking against the dim, rust-colored sky. It wasn't Earth. It never would be. But it was the only chance left. Their ship stood behind them like a wounded beast, groaning with every gust of wind. The hull was scorched black, torn in places, the kind of damage that didn't just happen from entry. This had been a fight. A hard one. And not everyone had made it. Captain Havith didn't need to look back at the wreck. He could still hear the screams when he closed his eyes. He stood at the edge of a shallow ridge, overlooking a field of strange, spindly structures. They looked natural at first, like twisted trees or maybe bone, until you got close. Until you saw the grooves. The scorch marks. The deep, circular sockets where something had once been installed and later torn out. This place was used, someone finally muttered behind him. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. Everyone knew it. They weren't the first ones here. The ground wasn't just empty. It was quiet. Too quiet. And that wasn't how New Worlds worked. Birds didn't chirp. Wind didn't whistle. Even the soil felt wrong, too dry, too light, like it had been drained of something essential long ago. Maybe life. Maybe something worse. A soft crack came from one of the outer patrols. Then a voice shaking, "Captain, we found something." He turned. The patrol led them to a ridge not far from the landing zone. Just beneath it, half buried under layers of dust and ash, was a body. Or something like one. It wasn't human. It was curled into itself, bones wrapped in remnants of pale gray armor, long dead. But not for long. No rot. No decomposition. Just frozen in a scream, mouth open wide, jagged teeth locked together like rusted steel. It had claw marks across its chest, deep ones. From the outside in. "Whatever did this," someone whispered, "it wasn't us." Havith knelt down, brushing dust off the strange creature's face. Its eye sockets were cracked open, black and empty like something had been scooped out. Its limbs were long. Too long. Almost spider-like, but wrong in a way he couldn't quite describe. A low sound rose in the distance. A thrum. Like machinery. Or maybe a warning. "We're not alone," he said softly. They pulled back toward the crash site. Night was coming. Fast. And with it, a cold they hadn't expected. The temperature dropped faster than it should have. Faster than physics allowed. The ship's systems were still down, and the emergency shelters were barely holding the heat. The others huddled in silence. Even the children didn't cry. There was something watching them. Havith could feel it. Not just out there but below. Deep under the soil. Something ancient. And hungry. He didn't sleep that night. No one did. By morning, another body was missing. One of their own. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just gone. And the dust near his cot, swept away like something had been dragged into the ground. The search started at dawn. Half the crew spread out across the ridge and lower valley, calling his name, checking inside cracks and hollows and beneath any structure that could hold a body. The other half stayed near the crash site, weapons drawn. No one wanted to say it aloud, but they all felt it. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a recovery. And no one wanted to find what they were afraid they'd find. There was no blood. No tracks. Nothing but that same dust, shifted just enough to suggest a struggle that no one had heard. In the middle of a camp packed with soldiers, scientists, and civilians. It was impossible. Or it should have been. Havith stood in the center of the crater their lander had made, gripping a piece of fractured hull plating in his hand. It wasn't a weapon. Not really. But it was sharp. Heavy. It felt like something, at least. He didn't trust the silence. He'd been to too many dead worlds. This one didn't feel dead. It felt paused. Like something was holding its breath. The team returned at midday. No sign of the missing man. Not a footprint. Not even a torn thread of clothing. But the body they'd found the night before? That was gone too. Only a hollow in the dirt remained, like something had pulled it down into the earth and sealed the top behind it. One of the engineers lost it. Dropped to her knees, started crying, punching at the dry soil with both fists. Someone tried to pull her up, but she screamed. Screamed until her voice cracked. Then she whispered hoarse, "We never should have come here." That night a storm rolled in. No clouds. No rain. Just wind. Fast. Violent. It came without warning and tore through the camp like it was searching for something. The tents snapped. Wires came loose. Lights flickered and went out. And in the darkness, just before Havith gave the order to hunker down, a sound rose up through the dirt. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't wind. It was breathing. Full. Rhythmic. What? Coming from underneath them. They dug trenches. Not for protection. For warmth. For isolation. To try and create some sense of safety when there was none. No one could explain what was happening. The sensors didn't register seismic movement. No heat signatures. No radiation. Just that sound. That awful sound. Always at night. Always louder when someone was alone. The third night someone snapped. He bolted out of the camp, past the perimeter and into the field of broken structures. He didn't take a weapon. He didn't respond to the calls behind him. They found him the next morning. At least most of him. He was sprawled out beneath one of those bone-like pillars. His eyes were wide open. His mouth frozen mid-scream. His chest, ripped open from the inside. And across the surface of the pillar, carved deep into the stone, were symbols no one could read. Symbols that hadn't been there the day before. They pulled the body back in silence. No one touched the writing. No one even got close. By now there were whispers in the camp. Some wanted to leave. Others said they were cursed. One of the older survivors, former military, just stared off into the distance every night, repeating the same words. We weren't the first. Havith called a meeting. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. They all listened. We're not going back, he said. Not because we can't. Because there's nowhere to go. This is it. Our home, or our grave. A long silence followed. Then one of the younger colonists spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. What if it's both? No one wanted to answer the question. It sat there like a stone in the middle of their campfire circle, cold, heavy, and impossible to ignore. What if this place was both? What if it welcomed them only to bury them? The days didn't offer much comfort. The light was always too red, too dim, and it never felt warm. The sun, if it could even be called that, hung low on the horizon, unmoving as if frozen in time. Shadows stretched in directions that didn't match the angles. Some of them moved when nothing else did. They started taking shifts, 2 awake at all times. Never alone. Even inside the ship, people slept back to back. The 4th night came. The breathing sound didn't return. But something else did. A knocking. Not loud. Not frantic. Just steady. Dull thuds against the outer hull of the lander, like someone tapping with bone. They rushed outside. No one was there. No prints in the dust. Only the echoes. After that, they stopped trying to explain things. Logic had given way to instinct. People started drawing makeshift charms on their clothes. Symbols copied from old Earth myths, sun signs, crosses, runes. Others carved their family names into the ship walls, as if trying to anchor themselves to something, anything. Havith didn't stop them. He was doing the same thing. Every night he read the same letter from home. Creased a dozen times, worn thin. His daughter's handwriting barely legible anymore. He'd memorized every word, but reading it again made the ache in his chest feel more real. That pain was human. Everything else out here wasn't. They lost 2 more by the end of the week. One simply vanished, gone between 2 tents while her partner looked the other way for half a second. No sound. No movement. Just gone. The second was found outside the perimeter fence, curled in a fetal position, hands pressed to her ears so tightly her fingernails had broken. Her face was frozen in terror. There were no marks on her body. But her eyes were missing. After that, fear turned into something else. Desperation. They started digging. Some thought there might be something underground, an old facility, a bunker, maybe even answers. Others thought it was safer to be below the surface. Whatever it was, they had to do something. The dirt shifted too easily. As if it wanted to be disturbed. At 13 feet down they found metal. Not ship grade. Not human. It was buried in layers of fused stone and ancient glass, scorched by some heat none of their scanners could identify. The surface was covered in patterns. Circular. Repeating. Pulsing faintly in the dark like a heartbeat. And the moment they touched it, the air changed. The sky darkened even though the sun hadn't moved. The dust began to swirl in strange shapes. And the knocking came back. Not from the outside this time. From beneath the metal. Havith froze. No one spoke. No one breathed. Then a voice, quiet but certain. It knows we're here. The metal began to glow. Not all at once. Just around the edges. A soft, sickly green that pulsed once, twice. Then stopped. The ground shook. Only for a second. But it was enough. They ran. Left the trench, left the tools, left the exposed surface behind and pulled back toward the ship. The storm hit before they reached it. Wind came in sideways. Not just air, whispers. Like thousands of voices carried on the gusts. Too fast to catch. Too slow to ignore. Someone screamed. Not in pain. In confusion. I saw her. She's dead, but I saw her. Others claimed to hear their names. Voices from the past. Loved ones lost years ago, somehow calling from beyond the storm. Havith grabbed two people by the arms and pulled them inside the airlock before they could run after the voices. One of them was crying. The other was laughing. Neither could explain why. When the storm ended, everything was quiet again. And the trench? Gone. No dirt pile. No hole. No sign they had ever dug. Like the planet had swallowed it whole. They didn't speak of the trench after that. Not because they didn't want to. Because they couldn't. Everyone who had looked into it, who had touched that buried metal or stood near it for too long, something about them changed. Subtle at first. Quieter. Always looking over their shoulder. Then came the dreams. Each of them saw something different. But always in the same place. Darkness, silence, and something just beyond reach. A figure. A presence. Familiar and foreign at the same time. One of the engineers, the one who'd been the first to touch the metal, started writing on the walls. At first it was numbers. Coordinates. Then diagrams. Then symbols that didn't match any language they knew. When Havith asked her what they meant, she just smiled. It's not for you, she whispered. It's for them. He wanted to confine her. But the others stopped him. They said she'd been kind. Helpful. Never violent. Just different now. Like her mind had shifted into another gear. Like she was ahead of them, seeing something they weren't yet ready to understand. The storm came back 2 days later. No wind this time. No dust. Just silence. Thick, unnatural silence that crept into the ship through the vents and pushed against the walls until the metal groaned. And in that silence they heard something worse than noise, absence. The complete lack of sound made people panic. One man clawed at his ears until they bled. Another tried to break a window, claiming he had to hear anything, even if it was just the wind screaming. They sedated him. He didn't wake up. And when they checked his vitals, nothing was wrong. His body was fine. But something had taken his mind. They buried him under a pile of rocks. It felt wrong to leave him in the ship. By now the camp had changed. People moved slower. Spoke less. Ate in silence, heads low. Every sound felt important. Every glance had weight. The scientist who had led the initial survey started keeping a record, what he called a timeline of anomalies. He listed every strange event, every noise, disappearance, shift in atmosphere or behavior. He posted it on the wall near the mess. By the 3rd week it filled 3 pages. He stopped updating it after that. Havith confronted him. Why'd you stop? The man didn't answer at first. Just stared out the window, watching the dead horizon. Finally he said, because it doesn't matter. What doesn't? The pattern. There is none. That's the pattern. Then he walked away. Food supplies were holding, for now, but morale was unraveling. Not because they were hungry. Because they were hollow. People were forgetting things. Not big things at first, just where they put their tools or when their shift started. But it got worse. Names. Faces. Whole conversations. One woman forgot she had a daughter. She stared at the picture in her locker, confused, asking others whose child it was. The picture disappeared the next day. So did she. Havith started writing things down. Not just logs but everything. Thoughts. Memories. His own name, written in block letters on the inside of his coat. Because even he had felt it. That tug. That slow, creeping feeling that some part of him was slipping away. He kept the letter from his daughter folded in his pocket, rereading it every morning. That kept him grounded. Most days. But even the letter was starting to feel distant. Like a story someone else had told him. Like fiction. At night he heard her voice. Calling from the ridge. Calling him by name. But she was dead. Had been for years. He never answered. Not out loud. And still, every time he looked out toward the ridge there were footprints in the dust. Small ones. Too small for anyone left in the camp. The scientist came to him again a week later. His eyes were sunken. His hands shook. But he had something to say. I don't think this is a planet, he whispered. Not in the way we think of one. Havith stared at him. I mean, look at it. The way the weather behaves. The way it responds to us. It's not alive, but it's not just dead rock either. You think it's artificial? The man hesitated. No. I think it's something else. Something older. Maybe even beyond artificial. Maybe it was alive. What? Maybe it still is. But not like us. Havith wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him he was talking nonsense. But he couldn't. Not after what he'd seen. What they'd all seen. And then the survey team found the doors. Buried in the northern cliffs. Half covered in ash and stone. Tall, wide, made of the same strange metal from the trench. Only this time there were markings. Symbols. A kind of warning, maybe. Or maybe an invitation. The doors hadn't been there before. The cliffs were the same ones they had scanned on the first day. Solid rock. No openings. Nothing out of the ordinary. But now they were here. Like they had grown out of the cliff face overnight. They didn't open. They didn't move. But when people stood too close, their equipment glitched. Sensors fried. Batteries drained. And more than one person swore they heard something, like music or language or maybe both, coming from deep inside. No one was allowed near it after that. Not officially anyway. But one morning, Havith woke to find someone had carved a message into the ship's interior wall. Let us in. He called a full meeting. Everyone. No exceptions. He didn't ask who wrote it. He didn't ask who had disobeyed the perimeter order. He just asked a simple question. Do you feel like you're being watched? Not a single person said no. He looked around at their faces. Pale. Hollow. Tired in ways sleep wouldn't fix. These weren't explorers anymore. They were survivors. Just barely. And something was learning from them. Learning their habits. Learning what scared them. Learning what they loved. And using it. That night the voices came back. Not whispers. Not noise. Voices. Full sentences. Spoken in familiar tones. Some were loved ones. Others were long-dead friends. Some used their own voices, copies of themselves, echoing from the vents, from the corridors, from the dark. One voice spoke directly into Havitha's ear while he slept. You're in its memory now. He woke up choking. His bunkmate was gone. Only his clothes remained. No blood. No sign of violence. Just gone. The ship felt smaller now. Not because of its walls, but because of what they knew they couldn't escape. The planet didn't need to keep them there. It didn't even try to trap them. Just waited. Quiet. Patient. Like it knew they had nowhere else to go. They thought about leaving. Someone even suggested activating the emergency beacon, hoping one of the colony transports still in orbit would respond. But no one did. Because what if the signal didn't reach them? Or worse, what if something else answered? People stopped using the comms. There were too many voices on the other end. Sometimes they came in before anyone had even pressed the mic. Sometimes they used names that weren't in the crew logs. One night, someone screamed in their sleep. When Havith and two others burst in, she was clawing at the ceiling, bare hands bleeding, trying to rip it open. They're underneath, she cried. They're not buried, they're resting. They sedated her. She never woke up. The next day they held a vote. Not on what to do next. No one had any plans left. Just a vote on whether or not to keep pretending things were normal. It was almost unanimous. No one wanted reports. Or routines. Or rules. Just survival. But Havith made a rule anyway. Nobody goes out alone. Ever. It wasn't for safety. Not really. Everyone knew that if whatever was out there wanted you, it would get you. But having someone near you, another human, another voice, another pair of eyes, it helped. Even if it was just for a moment. One man broke the rule. He left to collect data from a drone that had stopped transmitting near the ridge. Said he'd be back in 10 minutes. He never came back. They sent two others after him. They came back running. Pale. Shaking. One of them had blood on his arms. Not his own. They didn't talk for a full day. When Havith finally asked them what happened, the one with the blood just whispered. He was still standing. But his face was gone. Just gone. Like it had been erased. They stopped sending drones after that. The survey scientist, same one who had kept the anomaly logs, started writing again. But not on paper. Not in English. He used a strange script now. Circular, looping, almost organic. None of the translation software could read it. When someone asked where he learned it, he looked confused. I didn't, he said. It was always in my head. I just forgot. He slept with the writing pressed against his chest. He called it the signal. They asked if it was a message. No, he said. It's a map. To what? He smiled, tired but wide-eyed. To where they went. Nobody asked who they were. They already knew. That night, the doors in the cliff glowed. Just for a second. A faint shimmer. Pale green. No noise. No movement. But something shifted in the air. Like the planet had inhaled. The next morning the air outside was colder, thinner. Breathing became harder. One woman collapsed on the path between the ship and the water processor. Lungs full of fluid. No infection. No trauma. Just flooded. They moved the base camp closer to the lander. Started sleeping in their suits even inside. It didn't help. More dreams came. But now they were shared. People began describing the same place. A vast room underground, metal like stone, with walls that pulsed like veins. In the center, a shape. Not an object. Not alive. Just a presence. A weight on their minds. Like it had always been there, waiting. And the voice returned. Not always the same words. But always the same tone. Soft. Kind. Curious. You don't belong here, it said. Then, but you will. Some tried to fight it. Played music. Covered their ears. Drank. Screamed. None of it helped. You couldn't escape the voice. Because it wasn't coming from anywhere. It was already inside. One morning, Havith found a child sitting outside the ship. She was maybe 6. Hair like ash. Eyes too wide. No breathing mask. No name tag. No heartbeat. But she spoke. Do you remember what it felt like? She asked. He couldn't answer. She tilted her head. The old world. The one that came before the light. Then she vanished. No dust. No wind. No sound. Just gone. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't need to. The next day someone else saw her. Then another. And another. Each time she asked a different question. And each time when she left, something else went missing. A name. A tool. A person. They kept digging anyway. The writing was clear now. The map pointed beneath the cliffs. Toward the rock. Toward the resting place. No one called it that out loud. But that's what it was. They found another door. This one smaller. Hidden beneath an outcropping of stone, only visible in certain light. It wasn't locked. They didn't open it. They didn't need to. Because something was already pushing from the other side. Soft. Slow. Like breathing. They set up lights. Scanners. Weapons. None of them worked. One of the guards, an ex-soldier, said it felt like war. Not a battle. A war. But a war where the enemy had already won. And they were just discovering how. Havith didn't disagree. Because that's what it felt like now. Not a mission. Not an exploration. Not even a disaster. But a reckoning. And the planet wasn't angry. It wasn't even cruel. It was just remembering. One night the stars blinked out. All of them. For 10 full seconds the sky went black. Then they returned. Exactly where they were. But they were wrong now. Slightly shifted. Too still. Too bright. Like someone had redrawn them from memory. Someone who had never seen them in the first place. Havith stood in the middle of the camp and whispered the only thing he could think. We're not alone. Someone behind him whispered back. We never were. But when he turned to look, no one was there. The ground had started to hum. No one talked about it, not at first. Because if you said it out loud it became real. And reality at that point was already fraying at the edges. It wasn't a loud hum. It wasn't even constant. Just a low rolling vibration that moved through your feet when you stood still too long. Like a distant heartbeat. Not theirs. Not the planet's. Something older. Something buried deep enough to forget time. One of the engineers, Pavel, tried measuring it. He built a device that mapped the pulses. What he found made him stop talking. He locked himself in the medical bay. Wouldn't come out. Didn't sleep. Didn't eat. Just stared at his readings, mumbling about rhythm and order beneath the surface. They found him 2 days later. Still alive. Still quiet. But he'd cut the word welcome into the wall over and over with a broken scalpel. Hundreds of times. The planet wasn't trying to hurt them. It was preparing them. And it was getting faster. They were all changing. Not in ways they could explain. But they felt it. Like a tension behind the eyes, a weight behind every breath. Memories flickered and not all of them were theirs. One woman said she remembered being a tree. Another claimed she had seen herself from the sky. They weren't hallucinating. They were remembering things that never happened. And no one could explain why it didn't feel wrong anymore. Some welcomed it. Others begged for sedation. One just walked into the dark with no suit and whispered, "They need a guide." He never came back. Still they stayed. Why? Because leaving would mean admitting they never had control. That they were just passengers. That maybe they had never landed here at all. Maybe the planet had brought them. On the 4th week, the door under the rock opened. It didn't creak. It didn't grind. It just unfolded. Like it had been waiting for someone to finally see it. Inside was no corridor. No chamber. Just a void. Perfect black. No echo. No light. Yet it felt crowded. Someone put their hand inside. Only for a second. When they pulled it back, their palm was wet. Not with water. But tears. They didn't know whose. That night the child returned. She stood by the edge of the camp, still barefoot, still pale, watching the sky. When Havith approached her, she turned and asked, "Do you see it now?" "What?" he said, voice shaking. "The place between. Where things are kept before they're forgotten." He couldn't speak. She smiled. Soft. Almost kind. "You'll find it soon." Then she turned to the cliffs and walked into the rock. Not behind it. Into it. And left nothing behind but footprints made of ash. The sky changed again the next morning. The sun didn't rise. The sky didn't darken either. It just turned the color of bone. White. Endless. Wrong. The birds, those strange shadow-winged things that circled the cliffs, they vanished. Not flew away. Just disappeared. Even the wind stopped. That's when people started hearing music. Not loud. Not close. But far off. Beneath them. Notes that didn't belong to any known scale. Tones that made your teeth itch and your chest ache. But still, beautiful. Terrifyingly beautiful. Someone tried to record it. The playback was just static. But when they listened to it again later, alone, they swore they could hear their own name being sung. A new signal came from orbit. Not from the colony ships. Not from Earth. Just one word. Return. But no coordinates. No sender. No repeat. Some thought it was a warning. Others a command. Havith said nothing. He just kept staring at the cliffs. Because the lights had come back. This time they danced. Slow, circling spirals of color that moved through stone like water. They seemed to react to people's thoughts. When someone felt fear, the colors pulsed red. When someone cried, they turned soft violet. When one of the crew muttered a prayer, they turned gold. They weren't just lights anymore. They were listening. The team split. Half wanted to go deeper. Half wanted to run. The vote didn't matter. Because that night, the cliffs opened again. And the hum turned into a voice. Not from outside. Not from inside. But below. Oh, come. Endless. It spoke in a language that shouldn't exist, but everyone understood. It didn't threaten. It didn't demand. It invited. And the invitation wasn't to explore. It was to remember. Because this planet wasn't unknown. They'd been here before. Long ago. Before language. Before memory. Before names. Something of them had stayed. And now it wanted to come back. People started disappearing without a sound. Not vanishing. Not taken. Just gone. Like they'd stepped behind a curtain no one else could see. Havith found the survey scientist sitting at the edge of the door, staring into the black. His skin was marked with a strange script now. Not tattooed. Grown. Lines that shimmered slightly with his pulse. He didn't turn when Havith called his name. Just whispered, "It's not a place. It's a mirror." "A mirror of what?" Havith asked. He smiled. "Of what we used to be. Of what we'll become again." Then he stepped inside. And the door closed behind him. The camp emptied in days. Some walked into the void. Some simply laid down. One by one people stopped speaking. Not from fear. But because there was nothing left to say. Their thoughts were no longer their own. The planet had taken them in. Not consumed. Not destroyed. Just remembered. Now only a few remain. Havith keeps watch from the top of the ridge where the wind used to blow. The sky no longer changes. The stars no longer move. Time itself seems unsure. And beneath his feet, the ground pulses. Steady. Patient. Something is rising. It isn't fast. It isn't violent. But it's coming. And when it reaches the surface, they'll remember everything. He stood at the ridge for hours, not blinking, not breathing like he used to. There was no sun anymore, no shadows, no sense of day or night. Just the endless white above and the low, pulsing hum beneath. His boots had sunk slightly into the earth, but he didn't move. Couldn't. Because something deep inside him had changed. It had gone quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before a scream. That's when the voice came again. But it wasn't the same as before. It didn't echo from below. It didn't rise through the stone. This one came from inside his mind. And it wasn't a whisper. It was a scream made of light. He collapsed. His ears bled. His chest seized. But he saw everything. Not dreams. Not memories. Truth. The planet wasn't a planet. It was a vault. A living ancient archive. Not of objects, but of species. Whole civilizations encoded in stone and soil and air. Not just their bones but their minds, their ways, their fears and hopes. Everything they were. And now it was learning them, absorbing them. Not to destroy. Not to enslave. To protect. It had watched galaxies burn. Watched stars collapse in rage and war. Watched once proud empires grind themselves to ash. And every time, it had taken what was left. Stored it. Remembered it. Because the ones who came after needed to know. Needed to feel what had been lost. But this time, something had gone wrong. Humanity didn't fade into it like the others. They fought. Even as the archive pulled at their memories, they resisted. Even when it offered understanding, they asked for truth. Even when it offered peace, they held on to pain. The archive didn't know what to do with that. So it did something new. It created a copy. A perfect mirror hidden beneath the surface. A second Earth. Not a place to remember. But a place to rewrite. Down in the silence, something had been building. A city. A forest. A world made from fragments of their memories, stitched together by something that had never felt before. It used their dreams. Their fears. Their stories. And it built a lie. Not to harm them. To convince them. To stay. To belong. But it had made a mistake. It had created someone. Someone who didn't belong. Someone who wasn't part of the mission. Wasn't part of the crew. Had never boarded a ship. Had never walked the halls of the stations. A child. The girl. She wasn't real. She was the first creation of the copy. A test. A messenger. But the archive lost control of her. She saw too much. Knew too little. And now, she was missing again. Only one man knew where she might be. Havith opened his eyes. His body screamed. His mouth was dry as dust. But he stood. Because he remembered something no one else could. A memory that wasn't his. Not a dream. Not a vision. But a warning. Buried in a story his grandmother once told him. About a voice in the stone. About a child with no shadow. About the day the world would forget itself. It hadn't been fiction. It had been history. Passed down from a time before stars, when humans still walked among gods they couldn't name. And now it was happening again. He limped back to the ruins of the camp. Most of the structures were gone, pulled down into the soil like they'd never been there. But the comms tower still blinked faintly. A heartbeat in the dark. He found two others still alive. A woman with one hand and haunted eyes, and a man who spoke only in questions. They followed him without speaking. Because they felt it too. The child wasn't just missing. She had gone to the mirror Earth. She had crossed into the second layer. And something had followed her. Something that shouldn't exist. A fault. A corruption. The archive had taken in too much. It had stored things that should never be remembered. Not all civilizations die with grace. Some leave behind hate. Hunger. Madness. And one of those had found its way into the copy. It wasn't part of humanity. But it had learned from them. It had watched them. And now it wanted to be them. The child had gone to warn it. To stop it. But she was too new. Too fragile. Havith had to follow. He knew the way. Not because he was told. But because something inside him had always known. He walked to the center of the valley where the air felt thinner. Where the hum was loudest. He knelt. Pressed his palm to the ground. The soil opened like breath. And beneath the path began. No stairs. No ladder. Just a slope of memory and light. The others followed. The world above folded shut. No goodbye. No farewell. Just the weight of something watching. Waiting. They passed through air that wasn't air. Light that wasn't light. And emerged into silence. It looked like Earth. But it wasn't. The stars were wrong. The colors slightly off. The trees too still. The wind too slow. And far in the distance, rising like a scar from the horizon, was the monolith. Not built by humans. But for them. And at its base the child stood alone. Behind her a shape moved. Too large to see. Too fast to follow. But it had her voice now. And it was calling the others home. Havith whispered a name he didn't remember learning. And the air answered back. The copy had begun. And this time, it would not stop. She didn't turn around when they reached her. The girl just stood there, hair unmoving in the false wind, eyes fixed on the monolith rising before her. The thing behind her had stilled, its shape no longer shifting. It was waiting like everything else in this strange version of Earth, silent, watching, listening. Havith took a step forward, his legs trembling. The ground didn't move. It let him come closer. She finally looked back. Her eyes weren't the same. They held too much. Too many stars. Too many voices. He saw his own memories there, flickering like old film. "Why did you come?" she asked quietly, not with fear but with something heavier. Resignation. Because you didn't come back, he said. Because we remember you. She shook her head slowly. I'm not me anymore. Behind her, the shape began to pulse again, each beat sending a wave of something across the false landscape. It wasn't energy. It wasn't light. It was remembrance. All the things that had been forgotten. All the civilizations lost. All the pain they'd buried. It surged through the soil like blood through veins. The woman with one hand dropped to her knees, screaming into the dirt, clutching at something no one could see. The man who spoke in questions clutched his head and whispered truths in languages that hadn't existed for 1,000 years. Haveth stayed on his feet. He had to. Because he knew now. The archive hadn't just stored civilizations. It had merged them. And the child was the first of a new one, built from fragments of all the rest. And she was breaking. I didn't want to become this, she whispered. I just wanted to know why we were forgotten. Why no one came looking. Why it always ends. Because we fight too long, Haveth said, voice shaking. And forget too easily. She nodded slowly. Tears rolled down her cheeks. But they weren't hers. They belonged to a dozen voices. 100 lives. 1,000 deaths. They trusted me, she said. All of them. And I tried to hold them together. But one of them lied. She turned toward the monolith. And the thing behind her rose. It was no longer hiding. No longer wearing her voice. It had no face. No form. But it had intent. Hatred twisted into intelligence. A survivor of a species that had destroyed even its own memories. A thing that should have been erased long ago. It had used the archive. Used her. To return. Haveth felt it, deep in his chest, in the bones of his arms, in the tears in his throat. This wasn't a guardian. Was a repeater. A shadow of a civilization that refused to die, no matter what it cost. And now it wanted to overwrite humanity with itself. Start again. Use their resilience. Their defiance. Their strength. But strip away the compassion. Strip away the soul. No, Haveth said. He stepped forward. The ground shook. The monolith lit up with thousands of lights. Every memory, every voice, every story trying to scream all at once. He didn't flinch. Because now he remembered something more. Something buried so deep it didn't feel like a memory at all. It felt like a promise. Long ago, before ships. Before stars. Before language. There was something in humans that couldn't be copied. Couldn't be encoded. Not strength. Not intelligence. Choice. They had always chosen to hope. Even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. And now it was time to choose again. He reached for the girl. She didn't move. The shadow roared, soundless, wordless, pure pressure, but he didn't stop. His fingers brushed hers. And she remembered. Not the pain. Not the wars. Not the silence. But her mother's laugh. Her brother's crooked smile. The first snowfall she saw from the dome. The sound of his voice calling her name that night in the valley. She gripped his hand like it was the only thing that still mattered. And the monolith began to crack. Not in defeat. In release. Because it wasn't a prison. It was a vault. And it had finally been opened by choice. All around them, the false world began to unravel. The trees melted into color. The ground peeled back into light. The sky tore open like paper, and behind it was not darkness, but dawn. The shadow screamed one last time. And disappeared. Not destroyed. Not killed. Just let go. Because without fear to feed it, it had nothing left. The child collapsed. Haveth caught her. And then they were standing on the real world again. The valley was still. The ruins were gone. The sky was bruised but calm. He looked around. The others were still with him. Broken. Changed. But whole. The archive was quiet now. But he could feel it. Still listening. Still watching. But not controlling. Not testing. Just waiting. For whatever came next. The girl opened her eyes. And for the first time, they were just hers. I remember everything, she whispered. But it doesn't hurt anymore. Haveth nodded. Then it's time to go home. She looked up at him. But we are home. That was when he saw it. On the horizon. A figure. Walking. No sound. No threat. Just movement. Familiar. Human. Too far to recognize. But something about the way they moved. Haveth blinked. And the figure was gone. No trace. Just a breeze through the grass. But the girl smiled. Not all of them were lost, she said. Haveth looked at the sky. And for the first time in what felt like forever. He believed her. The wind that swept over the valley now felt different. Cleaner, softer, as if it had passed through something sacred before arriving. Havith stood quietly beside the girl, his hand still loosely holding hers. He didn't speak and she didn't pull away. They just stood there in the quiet, listening to the new stillness that had settled over the earth. The others began to gather, slowly at first as if afraid the calm would vanish if they moved too quickly. One by one, they emerged from the edges of the broken terrain, blinking in the morning light. Some were bruised, others had lost pieces of themselves along the way, but none of them looked lost anymore. The silence wasn't empty now. It was peaceful. The girl, now older somehow though not in years, turned to face them. Her face didn't carry the fear it once had. There was still pain behind her eyes, but it wasn't the kind that twisted. It was the kind that reminded you of how far you'd come. "What happens now?" one of the others asked. His voice was soft, cautious. She looked at Havith and he nodded, encouraging her to speak. "We rebuild," she said. "But not like before." There was a long pause. Then someone else asked, "What about the archive?" She looked back toward the place where it had been, where the false sky had opened and swallowed itself in light. Nothing was there now. Just earth. Grass. Wind. "It's not gone," she said. "It's part of us now. It always was. We were just too loud to hear it." Another voice broke the quiet. "And the thing that took you?" She hesitated. "It was real. But it only had power because of what we forgot." Her voice trembled slightly. "It lived off the things we buried. The hate we left behind. It needed us to stay broken." Someone near the edge dropped to sit in the grass, tired. "So we just have to stay healed forever?" The girl shook her head. "No. That's not how we work. We'll break again. But we'll choose what we do with the pieces." Havith felt something shift inside him then, like a lock turning. A door opening. Not to something unknown, but to something remembered. For the first time he realized what they had really come here to find. It wasn't a lost colony, or a mystery, or answers. It was themselves. All the parts they left scattered across the stars. And it had taken everything falling apart again for them to finally come back together. The walk down from the high ground was slow. No one rushed. Some of them laughed, soft, unsure, like testing the sound of it. Others cried and didn't hide their faces. The girl held tightly to Havitha's hand the whole time, and he let her, even though his fingers ached and his legs felt like rubber. Back at the temporary camp, they started sorting what little was left. Some of the equipment had fried when the false terrain collapsed. Other pieces still worked, blinking patiently like they'd been waiting. The comms array was barely operational, but enough remained to start rebuilding it. They made a fire that night, not for warmth but for light. They didn't speak much. Everyone was processing in their own way. But when the girl stood and faced them again, they listened. "I know what the archive meant to protect," she said. "It wasn't just knowledge. It was warning. Not of war. Not of extinction. Of silence. Of forgetting ourselves." Havith watched her, pride swelling somewhere behind the tightness in his chest. She wasn't a child anymore. Not in the ways that mattered. The shadow, the repeater, it wasn't just one species, she said. It was all the worst parts of what survived. The ones who couldn't move on. Who couldn't accept an end. Who wanted to use our strength. But it didn't understand where it comes from. "And where does it?" someone asked. She looked at each of them in turn, her eyes glowing with something gentle and ancient. "It comes from loss. From pain. From the choice to keep going anyway." Havith added, "From each other." The fire cracked softly. And for the first time since they landed, no one looked at the sky with dread. In the weeks that followed, they did what humans always do when they find space. They built. Not in the old way. Not with cities that scraped the sky or weapons that hummed with warnings. They built quiet things. Gardens. Libraries. Small homes that opened to the wind. They shared their stories around fires. They listened. They recorded not just facts but feelings. They made sure the archive would be different now, not hidden in vaults but woven into the land itself. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments. Mistakes. But no one was forgotten. And nothing was buried without a name. Havith and the girl often walked the ridge at dusk. He asked her once if she missed what she'd been, if she missed the voices. She shook her head. "They're not gone. Just quiet. Like a memory that finally let go." And when she slept, she dreamed of stars that no longer burned. Not because they were lost, but because they had rested. Years passed. The colony grew, not fast but strong. Others arrived, drawn by the stories whispered between settlements. The name of the place changed depending on who told the tale. Some called it the last landing. Others called it the listening ground. But to those who had been there since the beginning, it had only ever been one thing. Home. One day as the wind moved through the valley like a song, the girl, now grown, stood alone on the hill where it had all begun. She wore no armor, carried no weapons, only a stone in her hand, etched with lines so faint they were nearly invisible. She placed it at the base of an old tree, the first tree they had planted. The stone bore no name, just a symbol. The one she had seen carved in the heart of the monolith before it broke apart. A spiral turning inward, and another turning out. The cycle, the choice, the promise. She stepped back, let the wind take her hair, and smiled. Behind her, children laughed somewhere in the distance. Someone was playing music, off-key but full of joy. Havatha's voice called from below. She turned toward it, and didn't look back, because the past wasn't chasing her anymore. It had walked with her long enough, and now, finally, it had stopped to rest. The years that followed were ones of quiet transformation. The remnants of the old colony spread across the valley, settled into the land like roots taking hold. Slowly but surely people learned how to live again, not just survive but to truly live. They didn't repeat the mistakes of the past. Not all of them anyway. They had learned. The first steps were always the hardest, but they had faced the worst of humanity's flaws, looked them straight in the eye, and chosen to walk forward anyway. The girl, no longer a child but a young woman, spent her days working side by side with the others. She became a storyteller, a keeper of the things they had lost and the things they had gained. Her voice was steady, and her words carried the weight of everything she had experienced. The pain, the choices, the joy, and the freedom to choose again. One day, Havath found her standing by the same tree where it had all started. He approached quietly, not wanting to break the moment. She didn't turn to him when he spoke. "You've been here a while," he said softly. She nodded without turning, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The valley stretched out before them, green and alive. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land. It was a place of peace now, where the hum of tension had long since faded. "I keep thinking," she said, her voice distant but calm, "about how we started this journey. How we were all just looking for answers. For something that made sense." Havath joined her at the tree, standing beside her in silence. He didn't need to speak. The words had been said, and now there was just the quiet understanding between them. "I think we found more than answers," she continued after a moment. "We found what we're capable of when we remember. When we choose to keep going even when it hurts. We found our own humanity again." He smiled, the lines of his face softening. He had watched her grow. From the girl who had been consumed by the burden of all those voices, to the woman who stood before him now, strong, calm, and full of purpose. The others had also found their place. Some had left, seeking new places to build, new beginnings. Others had stayed, their lives now intertwined with the land and the people around them. They had each found their own way forward, carving paths that were uniquely theirs, yet part of something bigger. "Do you ever think about leaving?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She turned to him then, a soft smile on her lips. "Not anymore. This is where I'm meant to be. I think we all needed to be here to rebuild what we broke." Havath nodded, his heart full. He had never been one for grand declarations or promises, but standing there beside her, with the valley in the distance and the stars beginning to take shape above, he realized something. They were finally home. The past didn't own them anymore. The mistakes they had made, the things they had lost were part of them, but they no longer defined them. They had become something new, a community, a family, a group of people who had learned what it meant to survive, not just for themselves but for each other. And with that knowledge they could face whatever came next. The sun sank lower, casting a warm glow across the earth. The others had gathered below, sitting around a fire. There was laughter again, genuine, unguarded. They were living, not just existing. The girl took a deep breath and looked up at the sky, her eyes reflecting the stars that now seemed brighter than ever. "Maybe this time we'll get it right." Havatha's hand found hers, and together, they stood in the glow of the firelight, watching the new world they had built. The world that was no longer haunted by the shadows of what had come before, but illuminated by the choices they had made. And as the stars twinkled above, something deeper stirred within him. A sense of peace, a quiet certainty that the journey wasn't over. Not for them. Not for humanity. They had found the key to moving forward, not in the past but in each other. And that, in the end, was enough.